Peter Sklar, and Peter is the director and producer on Broadway. He's a writer. He went to yes, no, not almost, definitely. I'm a writer, you're a writer. He went to Juilliard undergraduate in New York City. He majored in piano, and Juilliard is a great, great school, as you know. Then he did his graduate work at Harvard in education, and that's very fond to my heart, Harvard. And so I have 4 generations of my family from there. And we are so thrilled that he is with us this evening, and he has really a lot to share with you. He has done some phenomenal work. He has been a coach for Sarah Jessica Parker, Reese Witherspoon. This man really has the credentials to talk. As my dad said, he can talk on his feet or he can talk from his seat, because he really has some important information to share with all of us. And I'm really excited to have him here tonight, and I'm excited that all of you came on a Friday night. I know this is difficult for some of you, and I'm so appreciative, and I love you all, and your kids already know I love all them. Okay, we're thrilled you're here. Thank you, Peter.
My assistants, Morgan and Katie. Morgan is from Texas. Katie, I picked up hitchhiking. Katie's from Georgia. All right, so first of all, just so I know who I'm talking with, how many of you, how many of you are under 18 and your parents were not able to be here tonight? Your mom or dad is not here. All right, just a few. All right. And how many of you go to school here? How many of you don't go to school here? How many of you are 10 or 11 or 12 years old? How many of you are 13? Anybody 14? And 15?
What age?
Anybody who's not a parent, who's 16 or older? All right. Getting used to the chair. So if I fall, the question is, like, you see, there's an old guy sitting in front of you and he's talking and he falls. Is it like, oh, is he okay? Or is it like, that was funny? All right, so how many of you are thinking about being performers someday for a living? How many of you would like to do it, but you're not sure it's realistic? And how many of you would perform for a living as an actor or a dancer or a singer if you knew that it was, you know, there were circumstances that made it entirely possible for you in New York and LA, where Hollywood and New York, Broadway, and film and TV and the dance world were beckoning to you and had a job for you? How many of you would take that? How many of you would turn it down because there's something else you'd rather do? And how many of you are still figuring out what you want to do? You're getting old. You better decide This weekend. Do people make you feel old sometimes? Like grown-ups say you gotta decide what you want to do and you gotta choose the path of life. This talk will be about 90 minutes, about an hour and a half. And during this hour and a half, I love those shoes. You like my shoes? They're really old. They're really old. These are my lecture shoes. I know these are really old. What was I saying? Something about the lecture?
90 minutes.
90 minutes, that's right. And I will tell you what I know. I will tell you, what I've learned from experience. And I'm happy with what I know. I'm glad that the things I say are true. I'm glad that there are not truths or realities that I disagree with. But these are not opinions. These are, observational things. Anybody in science here? Anybody ever hear the phrase anecdotal study, anecdotal report? That's where, somebody says, I know somebody who smoked cigarettes their whole life and they live to be 80. And they say, because of that, I don't believe smoking, hurts you. That's an anecdotal report, it's a story. Somebody is telling a personal story, something they observed. And in a sense, everything I'm telling you is anecdotal, except that my anecdotes cover thousands and thousands of performers over decades. And that makes you get arrogant. That makes you kind of like when somebody says, no, it doesn't work that way, or you might think it works that way, but there's exceptions. And that makes somebody like me say, well, that is possible, but if you haven't seen any with something like 20 or 30,000 performers over 30 or 40 years, you're probably not going to see any exceptions either. And even if they are exceptions, you probably want to go along with what happens 99.9% of the time. Now, there are several things that you have to do. Sorry, I need to bring this. This is a British water bottle. And I love it because it's big and it's glass, you know what I mean? And it creates controversy wherever I go. It's distilled water, mineralized in a British water bottle. Anybody wants to smell it, you can smell it. If I smell it from here. JK. Anyhow. So, there are certain things that are like laws. They're like laws of the universe, like gravity. Every action has to have an equal and opposite reaction. You know what I'm saying? There's certain things that you can't defy. People try, but you can't. And in the real world, if you follow those kinds of universal laws, you get wherever you're trying to get to faster. You can break human laws and government laws and maybe get into some trouble, maybe not. But you'll always get into trouble if you break universal laws. If you jump off a building, you're going to fall down and get hurt. And if you do other things that are not quite as obvious, you're going to get hurt. The least that happens when you break universal laws is you don't get what you want, you don't get where you want to be. You get frustrated. Things take much longer than they have to until you learn to start following the laws of the universe. So I've narrowed these things down because I talk to a lot of kids. I talk to thousands of kids. I hate children, but it's a job, you know. Somebody you know what I'm saying? I'm actually very ghetto. How many of you spotted that as I walked in? Call me Peter. Anyhow, so in talking to kids, I gave myself a challenge years ago. I was pretty wild. I did a lot of wild stuff. I didn't do anything like hurtfully crazy wild, but I did. I don't make it in trouble for telling this. I don't care. When I was 16, I hitchhiked down. I love the movie Selma. It has a lot of meaning. When I was 16, I left New York and hitchhiked down to Mississippi and marched with Martin Luther King, stuff like that. It was the 60s, and that was a pretty crazy thing to do. I got into a lot of trouble for that. But I'm glad I did it now. Don't do that. But I did. And, you know, stuff like that. I had a real hard time with algebra. I failed it 4 times. I haven't passed it to this day. I got an A in geometry, but I stuck at algebra. I think algebra should be illegal, but that's my own, I'm sorry. So I want to give you a little taste so you understand when I say things, you know, where it comes from. So what I decided years ago, because, you know, my father was very strict. He was a captain in the military police, and he was a school principal. And my mom was a teacher, and I grew up with this, you know, really Harvard education, and apply yourself and discipline and all. So I rebelled, you know, I went, you know, I always tried to figure out, you know, the way around things. And I was perfectly content to learn that the hard way. And you couldn't tell me anything, you know, because I knew. You know, just like if I said to you guys something, like you know stuff about what happens at school, you know about your friends and who's jealous of who and who likes who and who's in trouble with who and who thinks this. You understand? You're experts in that world. And nobody can tell you anything. And nobody could tell me anything. You know, I was very, so when I became old, you know, around 30, I started thinking about how do I, you know, how could I say things to kids in a way that would have gotten through to me back then. You understand? Because that's a heck of a challenge. You know, I asked myself, well, put myself back in myself when I was like 15, 16, 17, 18. And what would some old guy have had to say to me that I would have got it? You understand? So all my talks are sort of like that. I try to say things in ways that I would, you know, understood. And you'll get a lot of what I say, and some of you won't. But I can tell you this, if you follow these basic truths, there will come a time in your life, always unexpected, always before you realize it's happened, when deep down inside you will be glad with all your heart that you followed that advice. And if you don't follow certain principles, there will come a time in your life much sooner than you expected when deep down inside you will wish with all your heart that you had. You understand? So I've narrowed it down to 4.5 things. It used to be 5, but I forgot the last half. Kidding. It's 4.5 things because the last thing sort of relates to the 4th thing. By the way, when I tell a joke, people, I expect you to laugh. How many of you have fathers who tell jokes and you inspect the joke from every angle for a sign of humor and there is none? How How many of you have male teachers at school that are far less funny than they think? You realize that if those teachers were here right now, that would be a reality check for them because in their hearts they know that they're funny. They think they're funny. And you laugh because you want, good grades. You want to get a mad. So you keep thinking that illusion alive. My joke, though, I got jokes, and my jokes are funny, so I agree. And all my jokes. And not one of these, oh, Peter, you're so funny, make me famous. So the first thing I have to tell you is, and I get in trouble even today, because I have a rule that I live by. My rule is, I live by a lot of rules actually, but one of them is, if it doesn't hurt you, and it doesn't hurt anybody else, and it doesn't get you into big trouble, you should do it. That leaves a lot of leeway. A lot of things you can do that won't hurt you, won't hurt anybody else, might get you in a little trouble that you should still do. And I'm going to do it now, because I'm going to say something a lot of your parents are going to disagree with. But I'm right, because I have more experience. When you figure out, no, this is straight up. This is really. When you decide what you really want to do, when you get an idea, and by the way, I think you do know what you want to do. I think you do. I think you have an idea of what you would love to do. I don't think the details have been worked out yet. I don't think the specifics are worked out, but I think if you're really honest with yourself, most of you, if not all of you, bless you, know pretty much what you would love to do, like work with science, work with nature, work with animals, work with kids. You understand? You have an idea what you'd like to do. You just haven't thought of that yet in terms of like, that's my job, I get paid for it. And those little ideas, those feelings, those thoughts, that's the root, that's the seed of you becoming what you're going to become. And as that begins to become clear, if it turns out to be something that grown-ups are very skeptical about, like being an artist, or a poet, or a musician, or a writer, or an actor, or a dancer, all those creative things that parents get nervous, because they have visions of you starving, not paying your rent, not going anywhere. So they come up with advice, excuse me, which is something like, there's so much competition and so much rejection in the field that you're interested in, that you need something more practical and realistic to fall back on. And actors hear that all the time. Kids want to be actors, dancers, singers, that's all they hear. And that's the worst advice you could ever follow in your life. If that were a college course, it would be called How to Fail 101. Never, ever develop a backup plan. It is much better for you to be starving and struggling as you're working towards your goals for years in your 20s, and maybe even older, than to wake up at age 35 or 40, realize you never did what you really wanted to do, and it's too late. Because that will stink more than anything that has ever stunk before. That's Beavis and Butthead. There's a three-part combination of getting where you want to be. You have to work hard, everybody knows that. And you have to work smart. A lot of people know that. But it also has to be something you love. And the thing is, if you do all three of those, if you work hard and you work smart and something you love, you never fail. Nobody fails. Anybody who's ever failed at what they were trying to do, and you told me what they were doing, I could show you which of those three they weren't doing. Either they weren't working really hard, or they were doing a lot of dumb mistakes that they should have known better, or their heart really wasn't in it. You nail all three of those, you won't need a backup plan. And that's part of working smart, is not having a backup plan. That's the beginning of wisdom. Two people on a rooftop, and for some reason, it's essential that they jump from one rooftop to the other. There's this gap. It's doable, but it's going to take quite a jump. And one of them is stretching her legs and trying to get up the velocity, trying to imagine what kind of speed is she going to need to make that jump. The other person standing at the edge looking down, trying to figure out how to fall to break the least amount of bones. Which one's going to make the jump? You understand? That's my first piece of wisdom to you. No backup plan. Follow what you think you'd really like to do, your passion, whatever it is. No matter how unrealistic and crazy and creative and there's no job market for it, follow it. You love it and you work hard, you work smart, you'll create a job market for it. There's nothing that's ever been invented. Chairs you're sitting on, microphone, everything, the car you drive, where the person who came up with it was surrounded by people saying, that's a really good idea, you should drop everything else and just work on that. You understand? Every single thing that's moved this civilization forward has been met with a lot of people who said they should do something more traditional and more practical and not put everything into that. So why should you as human beings be any different? Why should you listen to that advice either? They didn't, and that's why we have a lot of good things. Number two is very difficult. And this is where your parents will probably like this, but you guys won't. Until you're 25 years old, until you are 25, 25, after 24, before 26. Not until you are 25 can you have a serious, romantic relationship and still pursue a successful career. You can handle certain jobs, certain positions, but you will not go as far as you want. You will not get there as soon as you want, and you will completely fail if whatever that thing is means being self-employed, like an artist, dancer, actor, singer. Do you understand? Or starting your own business. Careers and relationships with young people do not mix. When you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you have a support system. You have something to fall back on. You have someone who understands you and you can talk with in a way that nobody else gets. You have someone to keep you from that awful feeling of being alone. You look cool because you have a relationship. You have benefits. Holding hands. You shouldn't do that. You can get Ebola. And when you're young and you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, you're serious about this person, you can't help it. You don't need other things as much. You will not try as hard. You will not make the same decisions. You will not go as far as you want. And if you're in the self-employed or if your own business, your own creative pursuits, you will fail. Now, I have given this advice to so many girls in the performing arts in New York, my world, the entertainment field, that to keep myself from being bored, I cataloged what they all said in the order with which they would answer me saying, you really have to kick him to the curb, it's not going to work. They all say the same 6 things, so if you want, I'll tell you what they all say. This is the order with which we hear it. The first thing they all say, most of them say, is this is different. The next thing on the list is you don't understand. That's what they all say. Third thing is, he's very supportive of my career, we can make this work. Number 4, but I love him. Number 5, he's my best friend. And And number 6, my favorite, that's very interesting, we'll have to talk about it. And about 3 months later, either he is gone or she is gone or the career is gone. Boys, you can go out with girls, girls, you can go out with boys, but boys are toys. You play with them and you put them back. And make sure you play nice. But if you start finding it difficult to imagine your life without him or without her, that's the first sound of your career going over a cliff. Because it's not different. I do understand it won't work. Once you're 25, and I just picked that, some of you could be 24, some of you could be 25 and a half. Then you probably have the maturity and the independence to handle that relationship without it getting in the way of what you want to do and what you want to be. These are hard things. It's hard to ignore all the grown-ups who are trying to protect you, telling you need something to fall back on. That's hard advice to listen to ignore. It's hard to sit here and listen to somebody say, you can't have a boyfriend. You can sort of, but it can't be serious. That's like, go die, when you tell your teenager, go die now. Don't have a boyfriend. Same thing, that's what they hear. Any parents agree with that advice? Well, see, here's the thing. When I was in high school, they gave us a choice of languages. So we could take, Latin or Spanish. I chose teenage. And I learned really well, so if you'd like, I'm going to speak teenage. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to say something that only teenagers would understand. Grown-ups will be like, that doesn't make any sense. But you'll be like, yes, that makes perfect sense, and we'll get it. You ready? All right, here we go. You don't understand this. Here we have a group of people who love you and care about you, your parents. You are their life. They would do anything for you. You understand? They know you better than anybody. You've been around for a while, they want what's best for you and all that. And here we have an outside expert with all these years of experience. This old guy and your parents, we both agree on something about you, so clearly it must be wrong, whatever it is. You understand? Does that make sense? Yeah. Told you. Anybody wise enough to know what I just said? What I really just said? Like if your parents and some outside expert both agree on something, maybe you should look at it for a minute. You understand? Because, and this is another news flash. This is another news flash. There's a lot of things it's good to learn the hard way. There's a lot of things it's bad to learn the hard way. Wasting years of your life because of him or her, that's a bad thing to learn the hard way. Ending up doing something you don't really love because you thought it was more practical and realistic, that's something you don't need to learn the hard way. A couple other things you don't need to learn the hard way. When you go into a job interview, you go into a college interview, you go into a show business interview, and people talk to you. What do you have to bring into the room? You have no choice. What has to come in the room? Let me hear it. Be very specific. Okay. The answer is your body. How do you go in and talk to somebody important without your body being there? And tell them what you're So, in my business, we interview a lot of people, and sometimes we audition. And they walk in, all these kids, my business, I'm mostly likely to see professional actors and dancers and singers. And they look anemic and pale and dehydrated, and they're bouncing all over the walls, or they have no energy, they're lethargic. Something always hurts. Thick allergy rings under their eyes, they're sniffing, they're coughing, their face is broken out, they're a mess. There's a word in the entertainment field which applies to most interviews as the worst thing you can do. It's the death word of success. It's called fake. Fake in the entertainment field means that the director will feel like he's pulling teeth to get real feelings out of it. It means that the audience, the viewers that we spend millions of dollars getting into those seats, won't relate to you. You don't like watching TV shows when they're fake, when the actors are fake. You change the channel. So casting directors sit behind a table. They get paid about $3,000 a day to make sure that the people that are there are very likable, very believable, very open, very real. And that's more important than how good these people dance, sing, or act, or who they know, or how much they want it. Training, talent, desire, and who you know is like air. It's essential, but everybody's got it. If you were the best dancer, singer, or actor, most trained, most talented person to come out of Dallas over the past 5 years, you'd be just like everybody else we see every day in New York. But if you were the most believable, and the most genuine, and the most open, and also well-trained and talented, you'd be on a very short list called a callback. Fake is the worst thing you can do. Real is the best thing you can do. If you do not feel really great physically at an important interview or audition, don't you sort of have to be fake? People don't walk in and go, "Hi, I feel like garbage, but I really want this job. I really want to get into this school." What do? They crank up the energy, they sparkle, bubble, and shine. You understand? More makeup. Can we tell? Can we hear the sniffing and the coughing? Can we see the lack of life in their eyes? Can we see their bumps under the makeup? See how they get out of a chair? And we assume certain things. We assume they're not going to have the energy to make it through the rehearsal period, or the orientation period, let alone the run of the show or the year of school. They're probably going to be busy being fake all the time, covering up how they really feel. And they're probably going to get sick sooner or later and infect the rest of my cast or the rest of you. So we don't pick these people. And in the acting world, there's this mantra, there's this chant as they walk out of the room. They grab their cup of coffee or their cigarette, or worse, and they say, "That casting director hates me, my agent sent me on the wrong call, I don't have enough credits in my resume, I'm too tall, too short, the piano player screwed up my music, God wasn't smiling at me, it wasn't there for me." They have no clue that what they had for breakfast that morning might have had anything to do with how they came across. Just something as simple as their blood sugar. And the problem is when you're doing this career thing someday, wherever it is, Dallas, New York, and you're running around trying to get yourself established and trying to meet the right people and take the right classes and do everything you're supposed to do, that's not when you're going to change your lifelong eating habits. Which means if you don't start now having a big protein-rich breakfast every morning, not a bowl of sugar, I mean cereal. Big protein-rich breakfast every morning, lots of green vegetables every day, very little sugar, very little caffeine. Wash your hands more often, drink more water, and get more sleep. If you do not do these things, you will never have the energy or the appearance to convince enough people to do for you what you need them to do. Like, hire you. You understand? You cannot get around the fact that at this point in human development, we have a body. Maybe someday we won't. But as long as you got this thing you got to bring in the room, you have to take care of it. That's number 3. And by the way, I'm just telling you to do it because you'll be more successful in your careers and stuff. But there's a real downside to not doing it. I've given this talk long enough to know that what I'm about to ask you the reactions I'm going to get were not always like this. So here's your reality check. How many of you know somebody who has blood sugar issues or diabetes? Hands up. Look around the room. Clearly, you're not eating, these people are not eating what they should eat. Would you agree?
Yes.
How many of you know somebody who's had some heart problems? Hands up. How many of you know somebody who's had some form of cancer? Around here. You do know that this wouldn't have been the case 30, 40, 50 years ago. So not taking care of yourself means that not getting that job or that career is not the worst thing that's going to happen to you. You understand? And that's number 3. What you eat, how you take care of yourself physically. It affects your mood, affects your emotions, affects your body, affects your energy. You understand? Number 4, interviews are always personal. In professional interviews, we don't ask you stupid questions. We don't ask you, what's your favorite color? Oh, blue? You must be spiritual. That's dumb. We ask you about your brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and pets and hobbies and boyfriends and girlfriends and your parents. And then we don't listen to the answers. Especially in my field, because most of the time we're talking to actors and they lie. And they're good at it. But the real reason we don't listen so much to the answers is because there's another way to know a lot about you. That's your body language, the look in your eye, the expression on your face, all of your nonverbal stuff. I can look at any kid in this room right now. I don't know you at all. I can look at any kid in this room right now and I can tell things about you. Who wants to volunteer? I'll start with you. No, this child over here. This child. Friday. She's late. I think that she's pretty independent. I think she finds ways to get attention that are more creative than most people. I think she's got a great sense of humor. I think she certainly likes being different. That's important to her, or at least being seen as that she's different. Who owns this? I got most of that right. Another volunteer? Weenie, monkey. I gotta be able to see you or I can't do it. It doesn't work. I think that you're stubborn. I think you have a lot of pride. I think you have a temper. And I think you're a little too hard on yourself. I think you have to get mad at yourself much more than you should. I'll do one more. Let's see, ugly, retarded. Just remember, 16, 17 never grew up. Let it slide. He's so irresponsible that he gives good advice. I think that you have struggled with shyness at some point in your life. Either getting better or not. I think you're very sweet. I think that it's hard for you to handle people getting mad at you, especially if you're not some people in charge. Look at this one here. That's what I think. So you are good at, I think you're a little sneaky, you get away with stuff too. That's the way you get out of it. and the shyness. That's what I got. Any of that scene? Trying to please. And a bit of a perfectionist. That kind of control. And I should tell you that I'm never wrong. My favorite is, I think you're a little offensive. No, I'm not. Anybody skeptical? I'll do you. Do you think I'm just throwing out general adolescent traits? I'm really skeptical, not just like, this is a chance for you to do. Skeptical? You're just making stuff. That's what I asked for. A lot of comparing yourself with others, more than most kids, and worrying about it. And you could be a little happier with you. I'm done. It's hard work. If I can look at a kid and I can see 2 or 3 things about them, here's the question. How well in a 5-minute interview could they hide their basic personalities from someone like me? Do you understand? If you took a survey of casting people, professional interviewers, you ask them, how soon do you know whether or not you're interested in somebody? They'll tell you before, excuse me, before they get their whole body in the door. Way before they even get to the table. They've already got millions of impressions going on. Lots of nonverbal stuff happening. And in my business, the casting directors can't be wrong. A police detective could size you up and be wrong about you. A psychologist could size you up and be wrong about you. Those things can be fixed. But if a casting director puts a kid in a show, especially a movie or TV show, and the audience doesn't relate to that person the way we want them to, that's a multi-million-dollar irreversible mistake. Which means they can't be wrong. They have to be really good at listening to their instincts. They're like a barometer for the audience. Excuse me. What they see and what they feel, they assume that's what the viewers will feel, and they're paid a lot of money because they're always right. Like 99% of the time. Now, I'm not a casting person, but I work with a lot of them, and I certainly interview. And I know that if I can see something and looking at somebody just by them sitting there, and I can see a couple of things, imagine when I'm talking to them for 5 minutes. And this is a field, in my case, with actors who are trained to be very convincing, even if what they're saying is not accurate. And people who interview those people, and casting directors, have to see through all of that. So my point to you is that you're not going to make people believe things about you that are not true, not the people that matter. You hear what I'm saying to you? So here's the thing. Suppose you have a toy, or a pet, or a shirt, or a thing, and you have that. That's yours. And you like it. You feel good about it. You see it, you like it. You think it looks good on you, or you feel happy about having it. In general, do you let people see it? So when you got up this morning, you put on clothes that you thought looked okay, right? You didn't put on, the thing you got from your aunt for your last birthday that looks like doesn't belong in anybody's closet. No offense to your aunt. Here you go. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You let people see things that you feel good about. You show people things if you like them. It's what we do. Suppose that thing is you. Suppose I ask you questions about you, and deep down inside you're not that happy about you. How open with me will you be? You think people walk into important interviews and go, "Hi, I stink. I'm bad. Everybody else you saw today is more talented than me. I'm fat. I'm not that smart. But I really want this part, please." Think people do that? Think people have those feelings?
Yes.
How do they behave? Remember the word everybody hates? They do what we call the sparkle, bubble, and shine syndrome. I will ask a boy, "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" "Yes, I have a brother." "How do you get along with your brother?" "Oh, we're pals, best friends, never fight." "Are you nervous?" "No, I always shake." You don't like you. Deep down, you're not that happy with you. You're going to have a hard time showing me you. And then I will not pick you. Now, there's a problem with this. The problem is that there's some really bad advice going around. It's a wonderful goal, but it's terrible, stupid advice. And the advice is, you should feel good about yourself. You surprised I said that's stupid advice? That's like going to a music lesson and the teacher only says, "Play better, have better technique." Feel good about yourself. I always want to ask myself, well, what if they don't? Well, just do. You understand what I'm saying? You feel it? Haven't you tried to feel better about yourself? Haven't you given yourself pep talks and tell yourself good things? It doesn't work. You can't talk feelings out of your head, especially feelings about you. Many have tried, none have succeeded. Feelings about yourself are like vampires. Suppose a vampire comes into your house. During the following discussion, by the way, anybody who says that Twilight or Sparkle will have a large object thrown at them. What do you think is cuter, the vampire or the werewolf? You're not seriously. Brick wall, waterfall, girl you Vampire comes to your house and says, "Hi, I'm in your house." That's what they say. And you say to the vampire, "Get out." The vampire will eat you. If you turn your back on the vampire, you put your fingers in your ears, and you close your eyes and you sing the "I'm ignoring you" song. The vampire will eat you from behind. But if you can somehow survive to the morning, you open up the shades, the curtains, sunlight bathes the room in light, the vampire is seen clearly. Depending on which movie you've seen, think old school people. What will happen to the vampire? He will turn to dust, burst into flame, sparkle. Your feelings about yourself are like that. You can't kick them out of your head. And you can't ignore them. You have to put light on them. You have to practice being aware of them. You have to be honest with yourself emotionally. You have to know how you feel about you. And you have to be practicing that. Practicing is not going over something until you get it really right. As a Juilliard-trained pianist, I can tell you that practicing is going over something over and over again after you get it right. You understand? Before that, you're still learning it. You have to learn how to be conscious of how you really feel about you. You have to learn how to be honest about how you feel about you. And then you have to practice it. You have to practice being aware of your feelings, all of your feelings, especially how you feel about you. And that will do two things for you. Number one, you're putting light on the vampire. Those feelings will begin to lose their power. And the second thing is it will make you much less likely to be fake. People that are very successful in my industry are very genuine, they're very open, they're very real. Doesn't mean they don't have issues, they're not struggling with things. but what you see is what you get. And there are unions, Actors Equity, Screen Actors Guild, and you can't get into those unions in show business until you've either been on Broadway or in a major movie or a TV show. And then the unions come running after you with the paperwork. And every year those unions announce what percentage of their membership is employed working as performers. And these are the best actors, dancers, and singers in North America. And it's always about 3% are performing for a living and 97% are not. And it's not because there's not enough jobs, there's too much competition. There's not enough jobs for 100% of this very talented workforce. Not enough jobs, but there's a lot more than just 3%. You could employ 40, 50, 60% of the workforce who have already been on TV, movies, or Broadway at any given time, which means it tends to be the same 3% that are working all the time, and it tends to be the same 97% that are not. The 97% are very talented, very well trained, very well connected, very knowledgeable, very passionate, very good looking, very unemployed people. And that's simply because when you talk to them, you realize that they're not able to really be open with you because they don't like what you're going to see. We're standing here trying to figure out, or sitting here trying to figure out what you really like quickly. And you're standing there or sitting there believing deep down, if this guy finds out what I really like, he's probably not going to pick me. And so you act fake. And so we see that. And so we don't pick you. And out you go blaming, everybody and everything. Except how you feel about yourself, how you eat, how you take care of yourself, how independent you are, how focused you are. Success in all fields has to do with who you are, not what you can say, what you can do, what's on your resume. It has to do with you. If you are likable and believable and independent, comfortable with yourself, open, physically healthy, and you work hard at something you love, you will succeed. That's one of those laws I talked about. If you don't do all of those things, you will not, or you'll succeed to a much lesser degree than you want. You have to take care of yourself emotionally, you have to take care of yourself physically, you have to stay independent and focused, and you can't let people talk you out of what you want to do. If you do all of these things, and you keep up your studying, your discipline, I have a very good friend, his name is Arnold Mangioli. Somebody here knows. He's a former executive director of casting for Disney. Big guy in business. And Arnold has a saying. He says, nobody likes it when people say, Arnold, do you think we should go to college? I think we should stay in school. How important? He always says, nobody likes a dumb actor. So you study, discipline, learn things, take care of yourself, emotionally and physically, stay single and independent until you're a grown-up. Doesn't mean you can't date, just means you can't get serious. Don't let people talk you out of your dreams. Do all of these things. And then all the people who are unemployed, excuse me, all the people who are frustrated or not getting someplace, will point to you and say, oh, she just got a lucky break. She was just in the right place at the right time. You understand? She must have known someone. That's what you hear in the 97% talking about the 3%. And we call the 97% the unhappy, the unhealthy, and the unemployed. But they're talented, and they really want it. And they just can't convince enough people to share them with an audience. Now, if you follow this advice, you will be glad. If you don't, you will wish you had. Any questions? Anybody have any questions about anything I talked about? You guys learned something? You got a lot to think about, don't you? Questions? Anybody? Yep.
I got the 4, I missed the half.
Thank you. The half has to do with not letting people talk you out of your, never having something to fall back on. The way I word the half is, don't base your major decisions on fear. Fear makes people stupid and evil. And I should say, the inability to distinguish between a healthy fear and an unhealthy fear makes people stupid and evil. For example, there are things on this earth you should be afraid of, like people who will get you into self-destructive behavior. That's a healthy fear. An obvious example, you don't climb up to the top of this roof and jump off. That's a healthy fear. I personally think bungee jumping is a healthy fear. Unhealthy fears are being afraid to follow your dreams and work hard in your career because you're afraid you'll fail. You're afraid you're not good enough. That's a bad fear. That's a fear you should not base a decision on. And that's very closely related to people talking you out of your dreams. Those are people who are protecting you into being unsatisfied and unfulfilled later on. Other questions? Go ahead.
Has anyone come in to you and said, I feel pretty lousy, I don't like myself, or I don't, so they're honest, they're not fake, but they're not at the top of their potential game. How do you respond to that?
You don't see that at a professional interview. I talk to a lot of kids who say that. You know, I do a lot of talking to people. But I've never seen that in an interview or an audition. What would I say? I'd say, I'm really sorry to hear that. All right, so we listen. Good luck. Thank you. Next. Other questions? Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on Renaissance men and women? You talk about dreams and passions, which are, fairly concrete goals. But what if you're the type?
Good.
Actually, I am one of those people. But
Good.
do you have any thoughts on those types, or
Yeah.
your discussion doesn't have anything to do with it? What
I think it does.
Okay.
Hold on, let me
Sure.
drink this. Notice how part of the lecture gets more interesting than less interesting? You ever been to a lecture and the guy kept saying, anybody have any questions? And you knew if anybody raised their hand it was going to go longer, so you were hoping nobody would raise their hand. Are you sort of experiencing that now, Patty? The Renaissance that she is referring to means people have a lot of interest. You know, they're great at this, and they really are good at a lot of things.
Well, and a
And
deep
lovely.
abiding curiosity over many things.
So that goes along with, I don't like people pulling a 1950s communist Russia on kids today, where, well, you seem to have an aptitude. I know you're only 11 years old, but you have a strong aptitude towards, automobile repair, so I think we should, really encourage you to do that, I think every one of these kids should be a Renaissance person to some extent. You're allowed to have more than one interest and work hard at all of them until you decide you love one more than the other. Do you understand what I'm saying? It is wrong, it is unfair, it is unproductive. It is a hurtful thing to take a child who's 10 or 12, 14, 16, 18, or 20 and say, you should decide what you're going to be doing at 40 and 50 years old. Because 20 is very, very young. And you guys are like, I don't know. Wait till you get there. Oh, no, that's not true. You'll think you're old. Let me think. How many of you think you're old now, kind of? So.
Oh.
All right, let me give you a news flash. How many of you remember, how many of you are 12? All right, hands down. How many of you are 13? How many of you are 13 or 14? Okay, put your hands down and listen to me. 13, 14-year-olds. Do you remember being 12?
Yes.
remember looking forward to being 13? Do you remember having a sense somewhere inside that things would change because you're going to be a teenager and something's got to be different? Remember you turned 13 and nothing happened? It was still you. 20 is going to be the same thing. It's still going to be you. Other questions? Go ahead.
My question is, Einstein here was supposed to study, but he has this urge to play music or dance. Should we reverse that?
There's a schedule, This is the time for homework, this is the time for dinner.
So why are you doing homework? You have this urge to do it, dance.
Take a break. Just make sure he finishes whatever he's supposed to do. The purpose of school is twofold. It's not just the things you actually learn. It's learning how to learn. You understand? Learning how to control your cell phone. Tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, I'll be giving a lecture on electromagnetic radiation. Why this whole society is going to have brain cancer in about 5 years. Other questions? Well, I have to. They're not as much fun. In what way? Yeah, but it's see, this is what this question about older people and how they react.
Will you repeat the question? You didn't hear it.
Stand up and be really loud. Stand up and be really loud. It's okay, it's all right. People will like you more if you're really loud.
Do you get people that are older, do they react the same way? Like, do they hide their feelings like we're talking about before?
Okay, so, are you asking, do I happen to see people like that, or are you asking, do a lot of grown-ups do the same things that a lot of kids do? Yeah, all the time. They're harder to change. So here's the deal. You may have heard some grown-up say, yeah, I wouldn't mind going back in time being young again, but only if I knew what I know now. I wish I could go back with what I know now. Any kids ever hear grown-ups say that? Like, or something like, if only somebody told me, if only somebody told me this, So I give this talk all over the place, talk to schools all over North America. And because I'm in the entertainment field, every once in a while, a star will show up and come into the room. Because they live, stars live places. And, or a director, or a producer. Somebody big will come in and sit in the back. And they come because they're either their kids, they want to bring their kids to it. It's in the neighborhood, let's see what this guy has to say. Those are the ones that are always nodding their heads and saying, I wish I knew that when I was a kid, I wish somebody told me. So the thing is, do you realize now that you have a little problem? All of you kids, you have a problem now. You can never look back and say nobody told you. You understand? You can't look back. Later on, when you realize how important your health, your body, your emotional health, being single, all this kind of stuff, when you find out finally, because you're older and you get it, you can't look back and say, I wish somebody had told me that. How's it going to feel to know that somebody did and you didn't follow it? What's that going to feel like? When you leave here, do some hard thinking. Other questions? Oh, sorry. That it? You good?
No.
Don't come up to me afterwards.
So, self-doubt, right? You started to talk about that a little bit, and that can be a real problem. The vampire. Do you have tricks, exercises, things like that, besides the daylight, to help people in those situations with that self-doubt, that insecurity, or whatever? When they've done all their work, it's the problems here.
Nope. I believe the best thing is just to practice being aware of those feelings. Everything else is just what you said, tricks. You know, games, brainwashing techniques. You gotta be aware of what is. If you don't like you gotta know that that's what you feel. You gotta be honest about it, and you gotta practice being conscious of it. That's your vampire. A lot of light. Other questions? Are we good? How many kids are going to follow this advice? Liars. How many of you are going to try but you're not sure you can? All right, well, give it a good try because you'll be glad. All right, last chance for questions. Don't come up here after the questions. This is it. I don't do private question things. Go ahead.
How long have you been doing this with kids this age?
Over 30 years.
And have you had people come to you later and say, I listened to your advice and this is what I got out of it?
I have 2 stacks of letters and emails in my house. The big stack is, I came to talk when I was 11 or 15, and I heard everything he said, but I didn't listen to it. Now I realize it was true. I wish I had done it because I see what I could have, and I didn't. I wish I. Then I had this little tiny stack of, I came to your talk when I was 11, I was 15, and I followed your advice, and I'm so glad I want you to know because now I'm doing really good. So yeah, most people statistically don't go out and follow this. Maybe you'll be different. Go ahead. They always wish they had. Go ahead.
I can't throw away my curiosity, so can you tell me about myself?
I think control and order is a little too important to you, so there's a little bit of that, things have to be a certain way. I think not being in control is frightening to you when you don't know what's going on or you can't make it happen in a certain way. That's very hard for you. I think it's a big part of your life. Hold on. I think you're very strong. I think you can handle a lot. You're probably a very loyal friend. I think you empathize with other people very top number. I just made all that up. I have no idea what you're talking about. I really don't. Yes. She asked me in an interview what would be the most confident position to sit in that would look the most open and stuff like that. What you want to do is usually like the left leg extended. Take the right foot, turn to the right, and there's a lot of shouldering. That's probably the best. What am I really saying? What am I saying to you? You trying to control stuff like that is going to make me think, oh, she's trying to control how she's sitting. You understand what I'm saying? Go ahead.
At what point of your life do you notice that you haven't been following your dreams for certain?
In my teens. Yeah. I was going to be a musician. My whole family is famous musicians. I was supposed to be a professor of piano. I evolved from there. But I always knew I wanted to do something in the arts, kids, that was important. Didn't know what it was much later. Go ahead.
What's your best advice for overcoming your fear?
Well, my best advice, overcoming fear of failing. I think it requires 2 things. One is you have to be very honest with yourself about those fears. This is what I'm feeling. I'm scared right now. I'm really scared. I'm afraid this person's going to do this or that. They're going to say this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get these results instead of this. And I'm frightened of that. being that honest with yourself, and then still doing the thing that you're doing. Understand? The difference between a hero and a coward. I love your Alamo, your state, Texas. I go all the time. It's a fascinating history, psychotic. Time travel, man. If I go back, talk to Davy Crockett. Anyhow, but the lesson of the Alamo is that, you're there, brave as you want to be, as principled as you may want to be. You got something like, whatever it was, 10,000 armed, enemy soldiers marching towards you with their guns to shoot you. It's really dumb to think that the guys in the Alamo were not scared to death. Do you understand? Scared. The difference between a hero and a coward is they're both scared, really scared. But the coward acts on his fear. He bases his decision on his fear. A hero does what has to be done even though he's afraid. You understand? And my advice to throw into that would be aware of your fears. Don't be ashamed of your fears. Be aware of them. But don't act on them. The fears are normal, part of being human being. So protect the dynamic in your mind. You don't base decisions on it. Yes, second person.
So you look at someone and you say, you're confident or you're shy, or how do you know?
Anybody would know who has experience interviewing lots of people. If they're hired for that job, that's what they do, and they have a track record, they pick good people. They're good at that. It has to do with curiosity. I have to be curious about you to be good at figuring out what you like, otherwise it just won't kill us. It has to do with experience. I know certain kids who act a certain way and sound a certain way and move their body a certain way are going to be a certain way. It has to do with intuition. We have to be very sensitive to our feelings when we're interacting with you. And in my case, I cheat. I have a master's in education with a concentration in adolescent development and counseling. So I cheat. I know stuff about you even before I look at you. Then looking at you fills out the picture. Interested in psychology? Maybe? How old are you?
13.
That's a good question. Would it be fun for you to do that? So that people know what they're doing. Well, you can study some of it. You can study some psychology. You can read some books. Other questions? Yes?
While interviewing someone, what's the most important part of whoever they are?
That they're being real. By the way, other misguided advice is just be yourself, honey. When somebody says that to me, I'm like, oh man, I wanted to be Chuck Norris today. All right, I'll be Chuck. What does that mean? You're always yourself. All that means is don't be purposely fake. You can't not be yourself. Be aware of what you're feeling. When I interview kids, I give two pieces of advice. I always say this. Number one, don't lie. Number two, talk a lot. Use long sentences, the ones that have many words in them. I always tell kids, if I ask you a question and you shrug your shoulders, I'll throw a large object at you. And if I ask you a question and you say, I don't know, then you'll get wet. If you shrug your shoulders and you say, I don't know at the same time, then I have a stapler over there, and Mr. Stapler will become a problem. And if you put your fingers in your mouth, I tell you I will give you a choice. Either I can put my fingers in your mouth, or you can put your fingers in my mouth. And that's my interview advice. Yes?
How important is like what you're wearing or like what you look like?
Well, the advice I give parents when I don't do this much advising on this level anymore, but parents ask me what should she wear for an audition or an interview. I have always said that the kids should dress themselves. Because the kids will pick out something that they think looks good and they think looks cool, and the parents will be like wincing because they know that it doesn't match or it's wrong, it doesn't fit, whatever. Or the parents have a fantasy about what the casting directors will think, and they have a fantasy about the ideal way their child looks, and it's always wrong. So when the kid walks in dressed herself, and she's pretty happy, or he's pretty happy with it, and there's all kinds of flaws and little mistakes and clashes, that's part of the charm and naturalness of who that kid is. And it helps us do our job better. So the answer is wear whatever you feel that you look okay in. You understand? Yes.
You said that when you're a fantasy director, and you experience, how do you get that experience help you more about that?
Like how would you become a casting director?
You said the casting directors use their experience to tell your goal this trait. How would you get that experience? Just like looking around and making, how would you, like, how would you get the education behind that, making assumptions on people's personalities?
So how would you get the experience to be able to size people up either as an interviewer or a casting person or even a psychologist? Like, how would you do that? And the answer is to work for one. Like I have interns, I have two wonderful young ladies who have observed what I'm doing, assuming that they ever wanted to go into the field and then they start. I always tell kids to volunteer. Go to casting directors, go to agents, tell them you'll empty the trash, you'll run errands and get them coffee for free just to see what goes on in the office. Or maybe if you're lucky, you'll get to sit behind the table with them. So you work your way in volunteering. That's always a good way. Everybody loves free help. You understand? It's a way for you to get yourself in a position where you can see what we do. Other questions? Yes.
When you're talking to like celebrities or like older people, do you give them the same advice you give us, or is there like more along with it?
I've been responsible for a number of people becoming celebrities, but I haven't advised too many of them once they're celebrities. We just get along and enjoy each other, and that's it. I'm not there to, tell them what movie they should accept and what agent they should drive. I haven't thought, but... Oh, I could write a book. Mistakes celebrities make. Good.
How does God, which is man-made God, play a religion on kids understand?
Ask it again.
What is God, which is what we call man-made God, play a role in himself or not to be scared? So conquer your fear.
I'm not sure of the question.
What role does God play on trying to be yourself?
What role does God play in trying to be yourself?
Yeah, I mean, most of the people that you interview or actors.
I don't know. I have an all-purpose God quote by Jesse Jackson. Great quote, because most people don't do it. He said, do your best, trust God with the rest. And the reason I like that quote is because most people don't do their best. They worry and they worry, which is not trusting God, but they don't do their best first.
When should they worry?
You can't help worry, you have to work on it to feel it. Be aware of it like any other feeling. Worry, fear, anxiety, anger. You're feeling it. And you could argue God put those feelings in your head for all kinds of reasons, which I don't want to guess, but they're just feelings. So I like that quote, do your best. Really, do your best. Take care of yourself. And then don't worry, trust God. The worrying part's going to be hard. Yes?
There's so many talented students in this audience, and their talents are multiple.
How many of you are very talented? I only see a few hands. I don't see a lot of hands. Go ahead.
And so some of them, I'm guessing, want to go into acting, or to go into other performing arts, such as you went and did piano. But anyway,
I have no choice.
music.
Always tired. Let's sit down.
Is your students who are wanting to go forward in the musical arts?
Of course. Of course. I can't imagine an endeavor for a career where a happy, healthy, focused, independent person wouldn't do better than somebody who's not.
Well, I just find that a lot of the, say, musicians have a certain style that may or may not be themselves. It's a style that they push forward.
They may not be the great ones. Other questions? Yeah.
Would you be someone who told what job they should have or what job they want to have?
No, I don't think so. The job the person has to design this chair, what job they should have. Go ahead.
How is one sure that they haven't crossed the line between being overly honest and being fake?
Crossing the line between being overly honest in an interview and being fake. Well, first of all, you do your best to, to tell the truth within reason. You don't have to tell the whole truth. You understand what I'm saying? You don't have to tell the whole. You don't have to give details of your life. You just don't want to answer a question purposely false because you're afraid to say the truth. The real answer is you're going to make that mistake over and over again. You'll learn from experience. You should go on lots of interviews. Every time you get a chance to have somebody interview, you should interview. Because you're going to make that mistake all the time, and eventually you'll see the evidence. You know what I mean? Because if you're too careful worrying about that, then you're going to come across very guarded and stiff. Does that make sense? What are you feeling right now? I'm staring at you. You should be like me. I'm shy. Can you tell I'm shy? You want some burp? I have water. Sorry. Water. If you need to leave and get water, it's okay. Other question? One more question. That's it. We're done. Yeah. Guys.
You said that the way he's going to let him post heights and not use any last words. Was there someone that you might hear that or someone that has said maybe he's kind of weird? Or
With good rules or bad rules?
like the ones who said like 4.5 rules goes by to anyone like how would you go and help you with what you're doing?
No, I learned all that from my personal experience and observation working with kids. Nobody spelled that out. I'm not bragging, I'm just saying. I wish they had.